in some other direction than dealing with these tuppenny murderers, dictators, and torturers who fill my life in my own society. So I can tell you personally that looking back on my life, and it's that public aspect of my activities, no consolation there at all. I would rather have been doing something else. But they keep turning up, they keep churning themselves out, reinventing themselves, and interfering with what I consider should be a very rational, humane and just condition and entitlement of society. So for me, this is a very, but at the same time, I cannot deny that I've had moments of enormous, positive experiences. But looking back, I say that just looking back gives me consolation is something which, just doesn't exist for me. I agree that there's no reason why I should seek consolation out of it, but I disagree that it should make me angry. I'd rather not be angry. I'd rather not feel resentful. So I just take it. It happened, and that's that.
People find themselves at a certain time with costs they've paid. In other words, this is where you are, this is where you could have been, but you are here now because you did something, and that something now has changed your life and left you here. You can only go so far in rearranging the content of memory. There are built-in sorts of rules that seem to be there, at least for most people, that restrict what you can do with the content of memory. And so you can't just build a past and then say that's my past and live with it. That doesn't seem to work. That leads to a kind of psychosis.
There's something almost monstrous about the notion of looking back on one's life with much satisfaction. Almost monstrous after a certain age. One can write an autobiography called Errata in the absolute purpose to try to see where it all went wrong and not to lie about it and to be very precise about it. The point being that the saddest words in the human language are the two little words, too late. And when you know absolutely that it is too late, then it's time to stop fooling oneself and at least to try and make, all right, borrow the Marxist notion of self-criticism. It was a very powerful notion in many ways, had very positive aspects, and to train oneself to stop being, I agree with you, consoled. To be consoled about one's own past life is, I think, monstrous. But I want to say one other thing. What Proust gave to the relatively few, though the number is large, but to the relatively few who can really read him, passes, in my conviction, any political reform. What Proust has given to us, no damn program of political agitation or liberal whatever can come near. Proust has actually expanded the possibilities of human consciousness. Very, very few. Shakespeare's done, of course, Dante. But it's in that class. And
would you trade Proust for the end to slavery?
Pardon?
Would you trade Proust for the end to slavery?
Yes, as it happens, I would. And as it happens, you're not
for
going
you.
to end slavery. Nothing you can do will end it. It is spreading. And the point is, when we're frank, when we're mandarins like you and I, in this privileged profession, in our privileged life, for many of us, the destruction of a great painting, the destruction of a great library, when we are truthful, has a hurt and an immediacy which, alas, the destruction of many lives.
I can't believe that you're saying that, George. I can't believe that somebody who's thought about evil and anti-Semitism, as you have, would actually say the thing you just said here.
Proust, who had thought about these things very deeply too, educated consciousness to new riches, to unprecedented riches.
You think it's okay, so for some people to have no chance to have a life free from humiliation and indignity, so long as a couple of bourgeois people can have an educated consciousness?
Not a couple of bourgeois, a very large number.
No, well,
but
all right.
I'm convinced.
Who cares?
Why bourgeois?
I'm convinced.
Why bourgeois necessarily?
I'm convinced that in the name of trying to abolish the things you want to abolish, more evil has been done. That in the name of a dogmatic meliorist program, the millions are slaughtered.
Well, all right, we know that sometimes people who set out to do good do great evil, so that's true. So does that mean it's not good ever to set out to do good? It seems to me appalling that you would bring back slavery for the sake of Proust. I cannot believe that you say that. I think you said that to make an effect, and you don't really mean that.
Bringing it back, and you are doing nothing to abolish it. So parity for parity.
May I pose another question?
I think it is abolished.
Would you give Proust for the kind of political action and commitment which was taken, which was required, and the changing of consciousness, human consciousness, which was required to terminate the Nazi program of the Holocaust? Would you say, for instance, a work like Proust is worth the effort, the political program, the political commitment, whether it took the form of Marxism or whatever, and we know very well the evils of Marxism also, nobody's denying that. But when you try to weigh one thing against another, that's where I am bothered.
No, I don't weigh them. The hope was that the education of consciousness would make barbarism less probable, that was the hope. And very late in my life, I'm very skeptical that the humanities have humanized it all. That's all.
You talk about humanity as if humanity is a whole block of whatever. It consists of separate people. Some people are very, very good, even saints. Some people are extremely bad, disastrous, tyrants, murderers, whatever. And there are many people in the middle. And this middle is moving all the time like that. More than that, there is also a vertical thing, I would say, not only horizontal. We are made of good and bad. It's together. It's not that I'm a bad person or a good person. It depends whether I'm bad or good in different given circumstances. And I must say that works of great art, whether you agree or disagree exactly whether this particular art is great. For me, it's great art. What I consider to be great art, or just nice art, or even kitsch, but I love it. For me, it may save me from doing something evil. Because when I like something, when I love something, for me, it really may stop me from doing some evil thing. And many people are that way. You cannot be either only a murderer or a saint. It's one thing. And there is no trade we are talking about. No one trades these things. These things never happen. There's no place on earth where these things are traded. So this question is irrelevant, whether you would trade this for that or the other way around. And whom to save? For example, the house is on fire. Whom to save? A picture or, I say, a human being or 100 human beings? It widely depends. First of all, you cannot make clear decisions when you are in that house. You're not invulnerable. You cannot just walk in the flames and pick up whatever. Right. You are in panic. I was in the house when it was took on fire. I thought, I ran from this house, I thought that I made, sorry for personal remarks, I thought I made extremely wise decisions. First, I took my children out of this house, 2 small children, then I returned back, it was on fire. I returned back and took the most important things I could find there, took it out, returned the 3rd time, and took again the most important things. I thought, how clever and cold I am. I'm doing the right thing. When everything was over, I looked at things that I took, which I consider the most important. They were, this warm thing that you put on a kettle to put it warm, and a children's plastic car. Who will tell me what was going on in my head?
George would take the dog, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't take the painting and you wouldn't take the
preserve
person,
clear
you'd take the
thinking.
dog.
We cannot talk about it. It's a distorted state of mind. So you cannot discuss even these things theoretically. Even theoretically. Because when the fire happens...
Sorry, how does this relate to the subject of consolation for... I don't understand the...
I would have thought the correct answer is that these things can't be measured against each other. Proust novel is a great work of art which we couldn't ever improve. It is a gift in itself to the human spirit. And it also shows, for those of us who understand it, perhaps one avenue to a kind of consolation, or at least a way of living with oneself. Then, of course, there are these experiments in political thinking, which can perhaps also do many good things for the people who are subject to them. But we know that in that area, we don't have the example of the perfect thing which cannot be improved. We know that here we're meddling with human life in the raw, and the attempts to improve it have more often made it worse than it was before. So, you know...
Why do we think that?
Well, because
What's
of the sort of things
statistical analysis here?
Well, because of the sort of things that George is constantly and perhaps emphatically reminding us of, namely that the great crimes of the last century were themselves, on the whole, resulted from people's attempt to improve the human condition.
Well, but that doesn't show more often happens than goes.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well,
but the fact is that we know that in this area that we're imperfect. We cannot say, here at last we have perfection. Those who've said that, like Lenin or Hitler, have been spelt the worst of human destiny for the rest of us. And I think that you have to be very careful in that area, therefore, of thinking that you've got something intrinsically worthwhile.
Yeah, but I think it would be a big cop-out to say, well, we know we can so easily go wrong there, so we'll put our life into something else, which is where we can easily achieve perfection.
If you were sincere about these gestures, then you would give up being a well-paid teacher in that wretched university where you are and corrupting the young, and you would go off to Africa and do the things that Volley would like to see you do with the money you have.
Well, I think you've raised a serious question. I think each of us has to ask ourselves that question. But I think for me, the answer is that you can make a contribution in a number of different kinds of ways. And if you think that your physiology and so on isn't quite up to the life of an activist, then maybe you can hope to contribute something through writing and teaching. And one can, if one tries.
This is not being reduced to activism versus thought. No. On the other hand, some of the greatest European philosophers led eventually to the Holocaust. The racist philosophers,
But
Gobineau and company, they led eventually to the diminution of sections of the human race, including Immanuel Kant. The racist content of a number of European philosophers led eventually to the chickens coming home to roost. In the Holocaust.
That's part of the reason why it's so important for thinkers
to
counter that, to spend time thinking and writing on the other side. Is at least you can at least counter bad thought. If you can't create any good thought, you can at least object again and again to things that are evil.
I feel like we're sitting here trying to answer the question of whether Einstein or Beethoven is more intelligent. And I mean, who wants to answer that question? No. But if we go back to his original question, is reviewing your life consoling? Being a scientist in the area of memory, I look to my science to say that I think the examined life is not consoling, but the exact